Hello, my name is Amma. I'm the founder of a brand called Plantmade. Back in COVID, I was dealing with hair loss. Didn't know what was going on because I was 23 and it was not hereditary. So I decided, like any normal person, to just fix it myself with no science background. I used a bunch of research papers to figure out what ingredients would work for me, put it together, called up a lab. Guys, can I use this on my hair? They said yes. Started to use the first initial parts of the product. My hair was growing. All of a sudden, people were asking me for this solution. And I realized that I just accidentally start a business, and that was the case. From there, decided to turn it into a business, and then 5.5 years on, we scaled to a significant place, around 13 million in collective revenue.
And so you've built, you've lost, and then you rebuilt. Like, what was the biggest failure that taught you about scale that success never really could?
I'll definitely say patient capital was not something that we had. And what I mean by that is that we went out to market to try and raise for equity. Even though our numbers were good at the time, people weren't really giving us the opportunity. So we had to rely on maybe more unsecured lending, or like brands like Wayflyer and things like that are a little bit aggressive when it comes to their funding methods. But when a business you're working with is funding you and they decide their risk appetite changes, what do you do? So when one thing happens, how do you kind of recover from that? And I think for us, we were all, like the management team, it was all of our first times doing this. It was very difficult to figure out what to do next. So I would definitely say that, like, having so much reliance, we didn't realize how much reliance we had until that kind of opportunity for patient funding was gone. Yeah, that was really hard.
Yeah. Especially when it's like, was this your first company as well?
First company, yeah.
And the management team, again, not experienced something like that. You don't really know who you should be leaning on, I suppose, in terms of the advice that you should be taking.
Yeah, experienced, well, I was the least experienced out of anyone, to be honest. My brother had 10 years in finance, and my husband, who's also working with me, he was in management consulting and built manufacturing brands. So the beauty brand that we had was not just an e-commerce business, it was also a manufacturing house as well. So we were basically like building two businesses at the same time. So the cash flow was very different to most advice we would even get from the DTC market, because they did not have production in-house.
Yeah. And what were some of like the warning signs that founders ignore, maybe when the growth looks healthy on the surface, and if you're constantly chasing the revenue target? Yeah,
I think for us, we weren't really that aggressive with growth. We only just chose 1 year, which was 2023. That was our year 3 to grow. And a bunch of unexpected things happened at the same time. So again, with the finances, that patient capital was kind of taken away from us and we had to figure things out. We also had our raw materials going up as well. And I will say, external accountants, when depending on them, if they're not trained to work with a startup, it's quite difficult. Because if you're getting your numbers so behind, like a month behind, you are operating a little bit blind. So you need like real-time numbers. And that was something that took a few years for us to figure out, specifically me as the CEO. I didn't realize how much I needed to know real-time numbers.
And how do you build a brand that can survive like platform volatility and shifting algorithms? That's, I suppose, the money question, isn't it?
Gosh, I mean, I think resilience was said earlier, and that is everything that DTC is. Everything changes all the time, from political standings, changing tariffs and shipping methods, ingredients going up and down, marketing channels always changing. It's really about having your foot on the pulse and always trying to maybe have some experiments in your back pocket. I think even for us, when it comes to platform volatility, when we were marketing, we always had about 15 to 20% of our marketing efforts as experiments. We needed to make sure that even if something was no longer going to work, we'd still have something that we were testing, then we'd put to our kind of business as usual activity. So I think constantly trying to be in market for maybe all of the areas in your business is important, so that you have a fallback if something changes.
Yeah, don't put everything into like that test. And especially if it's, even if you guys think it's going to be really successful, or this is the right campaign, and then it could potentially not be the right fit or something's a bit different, and then you're not kind of wasting everything. So how did you rebuild differently the second time round?
Rebuilding definitely came from kind of stripping everything back and looking at the business from the bare bones. Because we were raising, we also had the opportunity to really dissect the business. So we looked at the unit economics. That was still fine. We did a great job. Fun fact, I actually priced the initial products at £9 when it basically cost about £5 to £7 to produce them. But that was when I was like out the gate. I was still shipping this out from my mum's kitchen. I very soon realized that was the wrong price point. So I upped the price very shortly and was able to get the unit economics very, very, very good. But when we started to trial out performance marketing, you start to realize that it was a different engine. So our organic marketing was not working anymore. And once we put it into paid, we really needed to strip everything down and figure out, okay, how do we find a new system to build and scale? And what we did was, well, we tested everything for free. You have your organic channels to do so. So just post everything for free. And if something is performing, you could just put that into paid ads. And that's how we'd kind of cycle that to make sure that we're trying to be as cost efficient as possible. Because especially if you put it into that engine, when it doesn't work, that's a lot of money lost. So yeah, tightening up the costs, really figuring out that, okay, the bare bones, does this business work? Yes, it did. And the marketing, does that work? Yes, it does. Then looking at all the other areas of the business, the manufacturing, the ops, making sure we really kind of tightened all those costs together.
Mm-hmm. And what does disciplined growth look like today?
Ooh, disciplined growth, gosh. I don't think we're inherently, like, as in us, I don't think we're inherently, like, so risky. I think it's just more so the unexpected events and kind of balancing those things out. But I think making sure that growth always has a baseline, right? So this is as much as we can spend. This is as much, or this is as least as we can benefit from these marketing efforts, from this product coming out. If you have that benchmark, I would say that is discipline. That's something we implemented, and that was very, very useful for us to be like, this is our CAC, this is the highest we'll ever go. We can't afford to do anything more because the margin just isn't worth it. So if you can kind of implement those things into your business, those are so, so, so important.
Do you use anything to help you when you've got to make those like high stake decisions? 1 second. Guys on the balcony, please can you be quiet because we can't hear what's going on. Thanks. That's been driving me fucking nuts. Okay. Yeah, let's go back to mental framework. So, yeah, when you've got to make those high-stake decisions, like, is there anything that you go through or anything that you use to kind of help you make and stay sane when you're making them and not second-guessing yourself?
Ooh, two come to mind now. I've been, really looking into mental models because I'm just trying to be a better founder and a better operator. So number one is inversion, which is something that Charlie Munger always talks about, which is if you know how to fail, you'll know how to succeed. So if you look at the vulnerabilities first, the problems and the failures, you'll be able to figure out what to avoid. Mm-hmm. And we might not always approach things that way. I mean, I think I'm a visionary founder, so I always go to the positives first. What's the opportunity? However, what is actually the vulnerability? What's the problem? Why won't this work? And then if there is enough to justify why it will, alongside why it won't, then this is actually something you might want to pursue. And then second order thinking, which is not what the first consequence is, but what is the second consequence? I mean, it's that kind of decision line. If you can think a lot further ahead, then that also will in turn be a good decision or a bad decision, and kind of put that to the side. So with like, are you more of like the creative brain? Do you need someone that's operational to kind of bring you down from your thinking, or have you got the best of both worlds there? I think I actually am the best of both worlds because I have a science mind. I kind of always have worked in because I studied psychology, so I'm always in experiments and proving a hypothesis with data. I still am a visionary, but I'm not like too woo-woo. I do have to back it with some data. So I'm glad I have the best of both worlds. But again, I work very well with creatives and operators too. Yeah.
And if you had to scale again from scratch this year, what would you refuse to do?
That's such a good question. I mean, I'm sure we would all say not grow at all costs, but I also think not follow the emotions. Like, that's not to say that I did before, but you can't necessarily be emotional in business. We have to be very factual. Okay, what's working, what isn't working? I think for a long time, there'd be like some products that we'd put out, and I'd be like, I'm destined to make this work because it has to work. And there were times where it did because the messaging was wrong. So I changed the messaging around and it would actually work. So I was right. But there was other times where we have to discontinue. It didn't actually work. Maybe the market was far gone. It improved. It had kind of, the market had changed. So I definitely think emotions really don't have a lot of wiggle round in business. You do have to follow the facts.
And you do have to like check yourself a little bit when it comes to the emotions. I think as like a founder or, you know, a leader, you get so emotionally invested in like your product or your brand or your company, and sometimes it's hard to take that emotion away and just focus on, like you said, like the facts and things that are going to move forward, and not be as optimistic as what you might naturally be.
Yeah.
And so last question, like how do you rebuild belief in yourself after a setback?
Ooh. Again, you have your own facts within you, right? You have a bank of evidence that you've lived. So as much as something didn't work, that was always going to be the case because this is business and there's a lot out of our control. So why don't we go back to the facts? What did go right? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. What didn't go right? That's there too. So it doesn't mean you're any bad of an operator. It doesn't mean you're any bad of a person building a business. It just means this is just something that was something to teach. And you learn so much more from mistakes and failures than you do successes.
I know. I actually did something recently, and I was speaking in like a group of other business owners, not in e-com, just like completely different, and I was getting really emotional and upset about like, you know, things that was going on, and they was like, have these like 5 questions that you go back after this call today and just reflect on what you could have done differently and why you could have done differently. And after I wrote it all down and I kind of clearly labelled it out of my brain onto paper, like it really helped me like think it's actually not that bad. Like everything is fixable, and you don't need to be so hard on yourself about making, you know, what necessarily it might have been the wrong choice at the time, but it's not the end.
Exactly.
And I thought that was a really good way of taking myself out of the situation and thinking, this is what I should have done and this is what I'm going to do in the future if it happens again.
I love that. Yeah, I think everyone should do that. That's so important.
Well, you've been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, brilliant.